Hi, everybody. Welcome to the, excuse me, sorry about that, some logistics already. Welcome and good afternoon. Really appreciate you joining us for the first episode of the RIA Succession Alpha series. You know that as an advisor, you help business owners with succession planning, but you don't apply those same principles to your own firm. And as a result, you feel stuck. You don't know how to bring along that next generation. Valuations make internal successions nearly impossible. Growth is stagnant, margins are tight. That's what this series is going to solve. Over the course of 5 episodes, you'll learn about valuations and M&A. That's today. You'll learn about how to evaluate your firm, growth strategies, legal structures, and the internal journey that you take as an owner. My name is Steve Tenney. I'm the founder of Grandview & Co. I advise owners of RIAs. I help them to architect their future. A critical element of that is succession planning. Many RIA owners help their clients with succession planning, yet they don't apply the same advice to their largest asset, their own firm. For context, I was also an advisor for 31 years. I was a portfolio manager, led business development, and managed 50 to 70 wonderful clients. That probably sounds familiar to you. I also built, led as CEO, and exited my own RIA. We were about $650 million. What I learned in that process is that I should have done things differently from the start and throughout my time at the firm. That is why I wrote RIA Succession Alpha and launched this series. We're going to have 5 conversations with 5 experts who each own a different piece of what it actually takes to realize the value of what you work so hard to build. A bit of housekeeping before we jump in. First, ask questions and put them directly into LinkedIn. This session is going to go for about 35 minutes. My book, RIA Succession Alpha, you can see it over my shoulder here, is available on Amazon. And later in the episode, I will offer RIA Alpha Index, which is a new diagnostic that instantly helps you evaluate where you stand. Today, I'm excited to talk with Kim Kovalski, and I'll bring her up to the stage. Okay. Hi, Kim.
Hello there.
Most RIA owners can tell you exactly what their client portfolios are worth. Very few can do the same for their own firm. Kim is a managing director at Marsh Berry, now part of Lincoln International. Her team advised on 139 M&A transactions in 2025. She sits at the intersection of private equity capital, buyer behavior, and seller preparation. These 3 forces shaping every single RIA transition that go on. Today, she's going to help you realize what your firm is actually worth and why that number isn't what you think it is. It's also worth noting that Kim was a contributor to my book, RIA Succession Alpha. Welcome, Kim. Let's jump right in. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Let's start out with a fun one. Tell us something about yourself that most people don't know.
Well, since I'm guessing I don't know most people who are listening, I could say anything. Let's see. I actually drafted my first business plan when I was 17 years old. I worked in high school. I worked at an ice cream parlor, and I grew up in Wallingford, Connecticut. And I started working there when I was 16. I made manager when I was 17, so kind of really uncomfortable managing people that I went to school with, but I did it. But the person that owned it asked if I wanted to buy the practice. And I knew that I was going to college, but I thought it might be interesting exercise to go through and see if my parents might be interested in it. So I developed a business plan and a model back when Excel was a backslash. All the commands started with backslash. And I'm sure if I pulled it up, I'd be mortified now. But that was the very first business plan that I've ever done, and that was at the baby age of 17.
That is great. That is great.
Yeah.
It's your backslash story or comment reminds me something that very few people know about me is that I my first job out of college, other than sailing and rolling out clay tennis courts, was working in London for Morgan Stanley Asset Management. And the office was about 50 people. There were, I think, 5 equity managers, 1 fixed income manager, global fixed income. And he had an assistant manager, an economist, and then the currency trader that covered the whole office was also in that office. And I was just outside the door, and my job was to help the economist. So I was doing data research, and we built our own proprietary data and brought stuff in from Bloomberg. I installed the first Bloomberg in that office, and we had a floppy disk from OECD every week that I would put in, and that was Lotus 123. Getting back to your health story,
that's what it was. It was Lotus 123. Yep.
Yeah, and I learned how to make macros so that I could pull all of this data together. And I had one project. They asked me to figure out if currency hedging was helping them or hurting them, and so I built a study. And it was a long macro, and I'd hit go, and it would go for a while, and it would break. And so I'd go back and figure out where it broke, and I'd go again. Well, eventually it went so long I had to do it overnight, and I'd come back in the morning, it was broken. I'd figure out where it broke.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Finally, it worked. I showed up in the morning, and it worked, and I had my study. So that was
congratulations. Well, back then macros were just recording your keystrokes, so you just have to make sure you had it right. Oh gosh, the good old days.
So RIAs, just like us, RIAs work in a business of numbers, and they also engage with human beings, people, their clients, their colleagues at a very deep level. Mm-hmm. Are RIAs about numbers on a valuation spreadsheet, or are they about the people behind them?
Yeah, that's an easy. Thank you for the softball question there, Steve. It is very much about the people behind the numbers. I mean, I spent a dozen years of my career in private equity, and we did all sorts of modeling and things like that. And at the end of the day, what I felt that we were doing, and it's not dissimilar from what buyers do today, is you're building a financial model which is representative of the business, and it is the output of. So it is the culmination of all the things that are happening inside of the business that ultimately generates a set of figures. And so it's really, and I think of it more like if a buyer is interested in acquiring an RIA, I think of it more as they're acquiring a professional sports team, say. And what they're looking at is what's in the locker room. What does the talent look like? What is the chemistry of the team? What are their unique skills and what are their collective skills together? It's more akin to that. And then whatever that looks like, they're going to perform in a certain way on the field, right? And so you put talented people together. They're executing on a plan. They've got strategy. If they do it well, you're going to see it reflected in the score or their numbers or things like that. And that's very similar to what we see in the RIA world.
I also find that the key to a good strong value in a transition is the transferability of what's there. So you need the talent to stay, maybe not the owner, they may be exiting at some point, but you need the rest of the talent to stay, which keeps clients in the seats, which means assets and revenues stay. And that's what a buyer is buying.
Yeah, it's about the durability of the cash flow long after. So there's an acknowledgement of what the folks have built, what the owners have built, but they're not buying what was necessarily built. They're buying the continuation of that. And so that requires that advisors stay on board. That requires that clients are still there. If these things begin to erode, then the value will have eroded and people will have overpaid for something. So it is very much that, Steve. It is about the durability of the cash flow into the indefinite future.
Yeah. My book, RIA Succession Alpha, talked about founders' reluctance or the tendency of owners to delay or just plain avoid succession conversations, which is incredibly common.
Yeah.
Can you dive into that a little bit? What do you see there?
I see it all the time. And so what I'd say is in succession planning, indecision is not neutral. It is an active choice that shifts control from the owner to the circumstance. And so it is very human to want to push off the decision or or not decide, but in not deciding, you are making a decision. And so we find that all the time, and it has deep implications relative to the business. So it might start with, you start to see things gradually. So you and I have had other conversations, and really probably related to when you were drafting the book, but around a lot of times owners feel that they don't want to make a decision one way or the other. They're just going to keep doing what they're doing without an understanding that their employees are looking at the scenario and wondering, what's going to happen here? What's going to happen to me? Clients are also thinking about that. They're not making decisions in a vacuum. And what you start to see is a kind of gradual things of, maybe your people start taking calls from recruiters. Maybe your clients stop sending referrals to you. So it starts kind of, these small things start to shift. And then ultimately, when it comes to valuing your firm, if you wait too long, you will see it embedded in the valuation that a buyer would ascribe to your firm. So it starts with kind of some subtle things happening. But the very best thing that owners and business leaders can do is provide clarity of direction, clarity of vision for their people and for their clients, because they may not be thinking about it, but their employees are coming in every day wondering, particularly as one ages, what is the plan? What is my role? What's going to happen to me? And certainly clients, we have that, if clients are not asking their 70-year-old advisor, what is the succession plan? They're absolutely thinking it. Most are probably asking it.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly well said. It can certainly be intimidating for an owner to declare what their plan is, because they might feel that they're locked in, or they think they might just be ushered out. Whatever it is, they're facing very personal issues in terms of what their identity looks like and what it's going to look like tomorrow. I went through that when I left my RIA. There was a major identity issue, if you will, that had to be recrafted. And we've actually got, I think it's the last episode of this series, is Jerome Myers, whose specialty is working with owners and their identity around what's next. Let's touch on valuation issues. I'm curious about what buyers are actually paying for. Walk us through the 2 or 3 value drivers. Actually, before we do that, what is a value driver?
Value drivers, and Marshberry, we have a slide that we always go over with our clients, which are the 12 drivers of value. So these are the things that are going to move the needle on valuation, and they could move it up or they can move it down depending on where you come out on these things. So the most impactful value drivers, as far as we see it, we're in the market all the time, are, does your firm have the ability to grow organically? So do you have a history of growing organically? If you do not, is there a reason that you haven't been able to? So you might possess the skills, but maybe you just don't have the time. Maybe you're at capacity. Maybe you're working on compliance and a lot of back office things, such that if someone relieved you of some of those responsibilities, you'd have time to deploy, so you have the skills to do that. That is probably the most important thing, followed very closely by your talent. Are you a 1 or 2 or 3 person advisor shop, or are you a firm where clients are touching all different people within your organization that's institutionalized? So do you have a G1 and a G2 and a G3? So do you have the talent that supports the continuation of your business? That is incredibly important, because to your point earlier, sometimes, not all the time, and by the way, this is one of the first things that I think I hear from almost every client early on in a process, which is, I do not want to sell my company because I want to keep working. And we say, well, congratulations. good job there. The buyer wants you to continue to work there, and the longer you can work, the better. And so there's no expectation that you wait until you're ready to exit the business to sell. That is not the right way to do it. Right. The best way to do it is when you plan to stay in the business another at least 5 years, ideally 10. You're focused on getting the earnout and continuing to grow the business before you're even considering transitioning clients over to others. So organic growth and talent are probably the top 2 value drivers. But then you start to look at other things like your client demographics, again, and oftentimes that mirrors your advisor staff. If you have a collective of, say, older advisors, oftentimes you'll see an older client base as well. And so that's there's lots of different reasons to have different generations of talent, but there's lots of, it's better to have kind of G1, G2, G3 talent, as well as that similar composition in terms of your client mix. So those are probably the most meaningful.
Yeah. I'm wondering, with some of these details you guys looked into, some of the value drivers, to what extent can they be solved by the buyer? And therefore, if it's a negative, it's not a meaningful negative. For example, if they don't do a great job marketing, but they're joining a platform that's amazing in marketing, does that get solved now?
That's a great question.
Or technology. Their technology is, 15, 20 years old. It's not, I don't want to name names of software providers because that wouldn't be fair, but it's an older CRM. It's not an AI-based CRM, let's say, or portfolio management software, where a lot of that, it might be holding them back today, but joining a platform solves that. So how does that dynamic play into valuation?
I would say that it doesn't. I don't know that it plays into valuation necessarily, because again, it comes down to the strength of, if you haven't been the best marketer, but you've still been able to grow, but you think there's additional upside to be able to be gained from marketing. I think that's part of our discovery process. Of a lot of times we'll work with clients who will say, well, I want to fix these things before I go to market. And we'll say, well, it might make sense to go to market to fix these things, because on the tech side, there's nothing that you're going to ever be able to do to attribute any additional value to your firm. In fact, 95% of the buyers out there will, when they acquire you, they're going to move you over to their tech stack. So having invested in things technology related does absolutely nothing for you. I guess that's point one. But plugging into, that is the reason that a lot of groups, when 5 years ago, when a firm would say, I wanted to sell, it was mostly around monetization. It's time for me to monetize the asset. Let's find a buyer that makes most sense for me, given some of the things that we're looking for. More commonly now, there's always a monetization component, but it's more around, I want to access a buyer for their marketing, for their G2 training, for all the things that they can do for my firm today that will help me protect my advisors and my clients and my legacy. So to your point, I don't want to say there's a direct correlation to value, because talent is all very important, but to be able to articulate what you're looking for and the things that will cause you to be more successful, that is going to drive maybe who we decide would be the best partner for you based on some of the things that you're looking to achieve. And then we can kind of line those things up in a way that's a win-win for everyone. It's a win on valuation, but it's also a win in that you don't have to go through, you've got buyers who have marketing departments. They have everything that you can think of. They have an entire function built around that with significant investment dollars supporting that. And so why in the world would you try to do that on your own? Oftentimes, again, with marketing is a good example. We find people who, when we look through their historical years of financials, oh yeah, that didn't work. We'll take that out. That didn't work. Every year it's like a trial and error. We'll remove that. That didn't work. We tried that. That didn't work. It's just a series of things that they tried and didn't work. And so kudos to clients for trying different things, but there are people that do this for a living. They're very, very good at it.
Yeah. That's unfortunately, that sounds incredibly familiar. I will readily admit. Just to take a quick pause, for all those listeners, you can put comments into LinkedIn. We will see them here, and we'll ask those or put questions into the comment field in LinkedIn. Also, we've touched on a bunch of great points and value drivers. To prepare for this series, I created a free diagnostic called RIA Alpha Index that will give you instant insight in terms of the readiness of your firm. And I'll put the link in the comments, and it's also right here on the screen. Okay, let's go back to the questions. You touched on G2 and G3.
Mm-hmm.
In my book, I highlight the fact that the two biggest barriers for internal transitions are valuations. Like the math is just really hard to have the next gen buy it, especially if the seller owns more than 40%,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly 100%. The other issue is G2. And there's a lack of a G2, or they're not the right person, they're not trained up enough, they're not being empowered by G1, whatever that is. How does a firm's succession plan, or the absence of one, impact their ability to recruit G2 talent?
It is a major hurdle in recruiting. There is a talent grab happening right now. And what we're seeing is firms that can clearly delineate a career path and a future, and maybe even ability to participate in equity, whether it's earned or whether it's purchased. There's visibility into what that looks like. If you're one of those groups, you're having an easier time recruiting than the groups that don't have those things. That is absolutely the case. And so if you want to recruit top talent, there's two things that you need to do. One, grow, because if you're not growing, you're not creating career opportunities for your people. And two, be very clear with your people of what their career path could look like, both from where am I going, but also how does the success of the firm benefit me directly? When and if am I able to participate in the equity? It doesn't have to be as a straight up owner. It could be through profits interest or phantom shares, or being able to provide clarity around career pathing and how you are financially aligned with the key people who are building the business with you is critical to be able to both recruit and retain people. Because if you're not doing that, someone else is, and they will be the people to win the greatest and best talent.
It's funny how far-reaching organic growth is.
Mm-hmm.
It as you said, impacts the ability to recruit G2. It impacts valuation, yet organic growth rates are in the low single digits. So fortunately, I think it's episode 3 or 4. We've got Derek Kinney on here, who's just a master at growth and wording and framing things. So I'm really excited to have him on here. I'm going to give you a little bit of a softball here, but also keeping it generic. Let's turn to preparing for the process. Let's say someone decide they've worked with me, let's say, and they're ready to go. They're ready for a transaction. They want to engage with an M&A advisor. What should they look for?
It's not dissimilar from what we would say we should be looking for in buyers. So I think you want to find an advisor who is aligned with you and your approach to how you serve your clients. So you're going to be in the trenches with the firm and the individuals that you're working with. And so you want to make sure, again, that there's that philosophical alignment, that you enjoy the people. And we too, from our perspective, when we're meeting prospects and groups that want to do this, is we have to also make sure that we feel aligned with them. Are they going to be good partners for us? And I don't think, again, it's very different than what financial advisors do with their clients. They get to, they want to find the clients that are aligned with their process and procedures and the way they approach the market. And so the answers are, make sure you understand what your advisor is going to do for you and make sure you're aligned with what they're doing for you. So in our case, I'm not going to speak about what others are doing, but I can tell you what we do is we believe that positioning you in the market is one of them. Again, there's many different things that are critical to a successful process, but really digging in and understanding your business, what you have today, what you're looking for in a partner, what your culture is like, what's most important for you and your people and your clients, what are the deal breakers? And in some examples, I never want to change fees for my clients, or there could be certain things in different situations. And our ability to, number one, extract that from you and understand that will drive our selection of who we think would be good for you. But also, a lot of times financial advisors, they're in the business every day. They don't really understand what makes them different. It is our job to convert this from something that you are selling to something that folks want to buy, right? So we have to be able to tell your story in a way that's really exciting and calls out the things that you're doing different from others and what makes you so special. And so that's kind of the front end, kind of the strategic positioning and the narrative and all the work that we do to make sure everything is told the right way. We're setting you up, we're understanding you, we're aligning you with the right set of buyers. And then from there, it really becomes the competitive tension has to be there to keep, honestly, buyers honest. I mean, if they were negotiating with a group on a standalone basis, the outcome would be very different than if they knew that they were in a competitive process. It does not mean that you run an auction and have to go to 100 firms. We do not do that. We do not think that is the right way to achieve the right outcome. We do believe that it drives value. But creating some tension there is really, really important. And then I think too, attention to detail is also critically important, and something that I think is missing in our industry, generally speaking, in that people can talk about the kind of the big multiples that they're getting for their clients, or maybe not. But oftentimes a client's ability to be able to achieve those multiples is based on the details in the purchase agreements. So it's not unlike, think about a real estate transaction, and I hate to compare what we do to real estate, but just say you're selling your house and you get 20% over asking value or something like asking price. But then what you didn't pay attention to was that the inspection didn't go well and you have to put $200,000 worth of repairs in. Your financing was done at 2 points. So it's not just the value that you're getting, it's the details that support how you get that. Are there mulligans? If the market's here this year and it's there this year, how is that going to be handled? And I cannot underestimate how vastly important the details of the transaction are to being able to achieve the headline multiples.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's awesome. When should they start? When should they start succession planning? That's a bit of a trick question.
Yeah.
And when should they start engaging with you?
Let me break it up into a couple different parts. So if you feel that you're going to sell or want to sell in the next 2 to 5 years, we should be having a conversation now. We should be starting that process and whatever that looks like. Oftentimes, well, we know this, that the consideration that folks are paid is paid out over the course of many years. And so if you say, look, I've got 5 more years in the business, or I have 7 more years, whatever that looks like, the expectation and to optimize your consideration is 4 years of staying in the business, being very engaged and growing it. So it's not that you decide to sell your firm and then you exit. That's not the way that this looks. So that's the group that's kind of closer to, I know I'm going to exit 2 to 5 years. Let's have that conversation now. If you feel like it's further down the road, maybe 10 years out, we should still be having a conversation to understand those value drivers. I'm working with a client right now. They're not ready to sell, but they want to understand the things that they should be doing right now to help their firm one day. They know they're going to sell externally, to be able to think about those things that are really going to drive outcome for them. And then for those firms that are really, a lot of firms we talked to, and CV threw this out earlier in the conversation, but a lot of firms say, I want to perpetuate internally. I do not ever want to sell to an external party. And my advice to those firms is, that's great. We can help you do that. But the trick to that is you're looking at a 10 to 15 year cycle of planning for that. You have to, as an owner, be able to be willing to sell early and to sell often. So it might mean that you're a 42-year-old owner who has found him or herself in a position where you're attracting people and you have to be willing to start to sell your shares when you're in your 40s, because what happens is, as your firm is growing, your firm becomes more valuable and it becomes harder and harder and harder to effectuate an internal transaction. So that has to be done in a very staged, steady way with a plan. And so that's something that we also work with firms on. So I'd say it's really never too early to be aware of what this should look like or what this could look like. And educating yourself on that is always a wise idea. And I, along with my team, are having those conversations every day, and we love to have them. I don't want someone to wait until the very end and make a decision rashly and in a way that impacts, doesn't protect the legacy of everything that they've built, doesn't, create protection for their employees and their clients. So having those conversations, it just can't happen too soon.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's a good answer for you,
Well,
but yeah.
That's what I hoped for. That's what I expected.
Yeah.
How much? Let's get as specific as you can. You've talked about external and internal sales. What's the valuation gap between those?
It's big. I mean, it is 40%, 50%. You can have a negotiated internal value, which maybe not be the internal and it's not the external, it's something in between. But there is, if a firm is committed to perpetuating internally, they are then committed to selling at a vastly discounted rate relative to what they could get in the market. And it's not just about valuation, Steve, it's also about, and they have to be convinced that they have the talent inside the firm to continue to not just run the business, but cause it to continue to grow and thrive. So it's a great thing to say that you want to perpetuate internally and you're willing to take the discount. Great. But are you willing to then train and develop and onboard the people that you need to be able to do the work and continue the good work that you and your leadership are doing? Because if you're not, then you will all have been for naught. And are you sure, and maybe this is something that you'll never be sure of, but how do you know that the next generation appreciates and values independence as much as you do, and such that you sell down and then 4 years later they're selling to an external partner and taking the value that could have gone to you. And so these are all conversations and planning that we want to work with our clients to help them think through. Again, if we have helped firms remain independent, it's a great thing to be able to do, but it's trickier and it requires a whole heck of a lot of planning, conversations with G1, G2, G3, G4, whoever's there. But it can be done. It just has to be done the right way.
I've heard that the ratio of perceived buyers to sellers is huge. I don't know if it's 10 to 1, 100 to 1. Everyone thinks that they're a buyer when they want to engage in inorganic growth. Most of them are not ready, and when you really pressure them, they're probably more on the sell side. But let's keep with the buy side for a second. What I've become aware of is that it can be really hard for the, let's call it the $1 to $5 billion firm, to be an acquirer of businesses, as opposed to the huge ones, the 80, 100, $200 billion firm. How can that smaller group, maybe it's a $1 billion firm wants to buy a $200 million practice, their finances are going to be a little more stretched. They just don't have the capital. They don't have all the resources that a huge firm would have. There are certainly advantages to the smaller situation, but how should that sort of small, medium-sized buyer think about approaching the market in a competitive way when you've got these behemoths out there?
It's a great question, and it's one that the industry is really challenged with. And oftentimes my first question will be, why? What is your goal in pursuing an inorganic growth strategy? And if I hear words that suggest, well, if I'm $1 billion or if I'm $2 billion, I'll be valued more highly than where I would say, but stop right there. That is no longer the case. That might have been the case at one point in time. That's not the case today. You could be $1 billion firm who has the things that we talked about earlier. You've got the different generations of talent. You've been growing well. Your multiple could be much higher than a firm that is larger than you, twice as large as you, who does not have those same attributes. So size does not make you more valuable. It really does not. So I guess that's the first thing. And so if I were to say, okay, so we get past that, I understand the rationale, you build a platform, you want to put more, so there's things that you want to do. Then the next problem that you have is, all right, now how do I come up with the capital to be able to effectuate that? And then how am I competitive here? How can I possibly pay? And the reality is you can't do this at scale. So you can probably pull off a few acquisitions and we can line up some debt financing and get you started there. But in order to come up with if that is something that is going to be part of your story on a go-forward basis, you need a more permanent capital solution that looks more like some combination of debt and equity. And then to your point, and then you need the internal capabilities to be able to do it right. So I don't ever suggest that people dabble in acquisitions. So that is a huge mistake. We've seen people that do one or two just because they knew someone and those things can kind of make sense. But it is a competitive environment and you're not going to win unless you have the capital and the expertise to pull it off, but also you need the value proposition. So if you are competing with the behemoths, as you point out, who are going to have very, very attractive transaction values for you, then what is your unique value add? It's likely not going to be price. It may not be all the services and capabilities you have either. It's going to likely be something different, which is probably cultural. Join us. This is the promise of what we're making. This is what we're doing. This is what we're building. You get to be a partner. There's a heavy equity component. So there has to be different things. And we do a fair amount of acquisition planning as well. That's part of the strategic planning work that we do with firms. If you want to be an acquirer, we will sit down with you and tell you, let's talk through what your program should look like, what you need to be successful from a resource perspective, from a capital perspective. Let's define what you're looking to accomplish here. What are the attributes of the firms that are good fits for you? So you're not just like throwing darts and kind of getting at everything. So, but I think that it can be additive in unique circumstances. But I do think I think it's fair to say, like, we want to challenge you and really test what you're trying to accomplish and why. And if it makes sense, we will say this, let's figure out a way. And if it doesn't, we'll tell you we don't think it makes sense, but we'll still try to help you if you still want to do it.
Right. No, I really appreciate that. It's the deeper you go, the more you test clients, the better the outcome. And make him a little bit uncomfortable. I think people appreciate that. I find, and I have a unique talent to making people uncomfortable sometimes. But just like testing them on what's their best possible outcome, like, and why, and why. Keep going deeper.
Yeah.
You end up in a better place because of it. So I want to wrap things up here. First, sharing with everyone your email, kim.kovalski@marshberry.com. I would imagine they can reach either of us on LinkedIn DMs as well. Also, a reminder that this is the RIA Alpha Index that people can get to, riaalphaindex.grandviewandco.com. It doesn't cost anything. It takes about 15 minutes. There's a lot there, but it is quite valuable. And don't forget to join us next week for the second episode. That is on Wednesday, May 13th at noon Eastern Time. We're going to hear from Sean Hutchinson, someone that I met in February of 2014, right after the Patriots came back from their 28-3 deficit in Atlanta when I was getting my SEPA designation. He's one of the best instructors that the Exit Planning Institute has. And he's got a great approach that he uses with businesses from any industry that helps you see what your firm looks like from the other side. So Kim, thank you very much. This has been absolutely wonderful. This is the ongoing series. You can see the 5 sessions. And Kim, it's been really wonderful chatting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
All right. Have a great day, everybody. Okay.